Good morning, folks. Welcome back to the Philosophy for Philistines channel. It is April the 6th, 2022, and I'd like to speak with you about the faith or religious nature of social collectivism, because it's always talking about some future time when universal salvation can be achieved. I want to read from a letter written by Engels to Karl Marx. Marx and Engels are the fathers of scientific communism. They are the authors of the Manifesto. That is why we transcribe below Engels' letter to Marx, dated the 23rd to 24th of November, 1847, which reads, "Give a little thought to the confession of faith." So that was the original title of the Communist Manifesto. Give a little thought to the confession of faith. I think we would do best to abandon the catechetical form and call the thing Communist Manifesto. Since a certain amount of history has to be narrated in it, the form hitherto adopted is quite unsuitable. I shall be bringing with me the one from here, which I did, in its simple narrative form, but wretchedly worded, in a tearing hurry. I start off by asking, what is communism? And then straight on to the proletariat, the history of its origins, how it differs from earlier workers, development of the antithesis between the proletariat and the bourgeoisie, crises, conclusions, in between all kinds of secondary matter, and finally, the Communist Party's policy, insofar as it should be made public. The one here has not yet been submitted in its entirety for endorsement, but save for a few minor points, I think I can get it through in such a form that at least there is nothing in which conflicts with our views. In the margins of the letter from Engels to Marx, Lenin quoted, Engels wrote the draft of the Communist Manifesto. I provide the link below. So you notice that the original title of the Communist Manifesto was a confession of faith. In all of the assertions that atheistic communists make, that their ideology isn't a belief system, the author, Engels himself, stated clearly that it was a confession of faith, but he didn't like to use the term because it would make them sound too religious. So I have some thoughts about where we see the state going today, with an utter attack on individual liberty, autonomy, Christian values, all the foundational principles of Western liberal democracy, constitutionally limited government, responsible government, under attack from this new coalition between the LPC and the NDP. With regard to what is going on with communist China and Russia, which is the direct inheritor of Soviet-style authoritarianism under a former KGB officer, namely Putin. Can anyone explain to me why it is so shocking that nations, which have been our biggest ideological enemies, are the very nations causing the greatest human suffering at present? The very fact that we have chosen to do business with them is abundant proof of the depths of our own complicity and naivety. Stop with this faux virtual signaling outrage. Please stop it. Since the West chose to get into bed with Beelzebub, we ought not to be surprised that our whoring has resulted in creating Satan's spawn. The locus for the nexus of the divine encounter exists only at the level of the individual. Social collectivism is a rejection of the spiritual nature of our humanity. Not a single culture has ever evolved which didn't have an ontology to provide individuals with a framework which could give life a higher meaning and purpose. Social collectivism is an expression of the nihilism which is the inevitable consequence of rejecting such an ontological framework. It is an attempt to create, as Nietzsche warned, the Ubermensch, namely the man who would become his own god, and it invariably has led to murderous, antihuman tyranny. On December the 1st, 1939, at the Swiss Federal Institute for Technology, ETH, Carl Jung is quoted from his lecture as stating that we fall captive to the herd animal if we cannot reach the individual divinity within ourselves. In this short statement, he described the reason for the totalitarian tyranny that was the predominant ideological pathogen of the 20th century, which resulted in the murder and oppression of countless millions around the world. All because mankind rejected his own individuality, sovereign and spiritual nature. In this he echoed what Nietzsche had asserted: God is dead, God remains dead, and we have killed him. How shall we comfort ourselves? The murder of all murderers. What was holiest and mightiest of all the world has yet known has bled to death under our knives. Who will wipe this blood off us? What water is there for us to cleanse ourselves? What festivals of atonement, what sacred games shall we have to invent? Is not the greatness of this deed too great for us? Must we ourselves not become gods simply to appear worthy of it? Western authoritarian governments seek to fulfill these sacred games by creating a version of political ideology which rejects the divine, loathes the individual, and seeks to create some version of future utopia which will be built on the corpses of its citizens and the ruins of the institutions their ideology is corrupting. And there won't be enough water to wash away the filth of this perversion of constitutionally limited responsible government. This is the very reason that voting cannot solve our ideological crisis. We must become the counter-revolution. This toxic ideology must die under knives forged by reason and religious passion to place our Christian heritage and values once again in the fore. As Jung asserted, the responsibility for this task rests solely on the individual and his or her encounter with the divine within themselves. Salvation cannot be found in social collectivism because no one is responsible or accountable for our individual sins but each one of us. They must be brought to God and repented of for us to find forgiveness and salvation. It is only by this process that society writ large can be healed, because every soul brought into proper relationship with the divine nexus within will effect healing, which will extend beyond ourselves into our family, our friends, and fellow citizens. You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden, nor do people light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a stand, and it gives light to all in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven. From Matthew 5:14-16. This government has to be stopped. This coalition between Trudeau, the World Economic Forum, people like Klaus Schwab and the NDP, with their radical leftist ideology and their mischaracterization of everything that doesn't fall into jackbooted lockstep with what they're demanding. These people must be stopped. And it is up to each one of us to do it. Individuate, Encounter God within yourself. I invite you to have a revelation of your own sinfulness, because remember this, it's only sinners who can come to Christ. Have a great day, folks.